It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. The Verdict is sponsored in part by the Able Law Firm. It's time for The Verdict.
And welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett, and I'm joined as always by one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. Kent, what do we have today?
We have a special guest from Missouri, the Show Me State. Bill Federer is here in Oklahoma City making a series of appearances. Bill is a nationally known author, speaker, lecturer, and historian of facts, and he has done some work recently on the origin of the Ten Commandments and their impact on American law, and we've asked Bill to join us today and discuss some of his ideas and become acquainted with his candidacy as well.
Should be interesting. This morning, William Federer, the author of a book entitled The Ten Commandments, Their Importance in American Law. It's next on The Verdict. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, who's going to introduce our guest.
Very pleased today to have William J. Federer, Bill Federer from St. Louis, joining us. He's in Oklahoma City for a few days. Bill is a native of St. Louis and a graduate of St. Louis University with an undergraduate degree in accounting and business administration. Has been in the private business sector for a number of years, has written several books we'll talk about today, has lectured widely on various topics. He's married, has 4 children, and he's currently a candidate for the 3rd district for the United States Congress position in Missouri. Richard Gephardt now holds that seat, and Bill is in Oklahoma City lecturing on a number of topics to various audiences, and thank you for taking time out to join us on The Verdict.
Kent, Mick, it's great to be with you.
I alluded to it a little bit, but tell our viewers, why are you here in Oklahoma City?
Speaking at the colleges, schools, on the television, on the major radio stations, just getting out the information on the new book I did, The 10 Commandments and Their Influence on American Law. And because of this issue going on where they're taking the 10 Commandments down and so forth, it's let's go back into our American history, see where we came from, and put the facts in proper perspective.
You're running for Congress as well, I guess.
Running for Congress, and
how do you do it all?
It's a challenge, but I ran in 2000 against Gephardt. It was the 3rd most expensive race in America, most expensive in Missouri history. He spent $6 million against me. We had $3 million. Dennis Hazard, Dick Armey, J.C. Watts came in and campaigned for me, and we got the most votes ever in history against Gephardt. And when I let it be known I was going to run against him again this time, he threw in the towel on the district, because he realized he's only raised $3 million for his presidential race. He doesn't have an extra $6 million to spend to keep a seat he really doesn't want. So the seat's open. I've got great name recognition, and it looks like a super opportunity, and Lord willing, I'll get in.
What is AmeriSearch?
It's American research put together, and it's a company I put together to research our founding fathers and heritage, see where we came from. I put together a book back in '94 called America's God and Country, Encyclopedia Quotations, and it's a collection of quotes from founding fathers, presidents, statesmen, so forth, what they said about God, deity, providence, religion, morality. One of the set of books I used was called a compilation of all the messages and papers of the presidents, every address by every president. It took me 6 months to read through them all, and I was amazed at how often they referred to faith. For example, every one of the 43 presidents mentioned God in their inaugural addresses. John F. Kennedy, in his inaugural, said, "The rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God." Harry S. Truman, in his inaugural address, said, "We believe all men are created equal because they're created in the image of God." There's nothing more I like better doing than to be in a public school setting or one of those places where they don't want you to mention God and let a Democrat president mention God in their inaugural address nonetheless. And some may say, well, they mentioned God but not Christianity. Well, Abraham Lincoln, in his inaugural address, 1861, said intelligence, patriotism, Christianity. and a firm reliance on him who has never yet forsaken his favored land, and so on and so forth. William Henry Harrison, I spoke at Vincennes University, and that's where William Henry Harrison had his house. He was the 9th president in 1841, his inaugural. He said, I deem the present occasion sufficiently important to express my profound reverence for the Christian religion. John Adams, the 2nd president, in his inaugural, he said, I consider a decent respect for Christianity among the best recommendations for public service. I mean, these are all quotes that talk about their faith, and it was in a public setting. And so I put all these together in a book, America's God and Country. It sold 250,000 copies. I was with J.C. Watts earlier this year, and he said that he used the book to write speeches that he delivered on the floor of Congress. And I even got a phone call from the U.S. Senate chaplain's office. They said they've been using the book for years to write prayers for Lloyd Ogilvie to open sessions of the United States Senate with. So we're pleased to see how far it's gotten across the country. And again, there's no commentary in the book. I can't take credit for it. It's just the quotes from Thomas Jefferson, Washington, Lincoln, Adams, alphabetically arranged by person. And it's an easy-to-use resource.
Well, you recently, and Mick's going to hold up for us to look at, you recently finished the book, The 10 Commandments and Their Influence on American Law. What's basically involved contained in that book?
Well, Harry S. Truman said the fundamental basis of this nation's laws was given to Moses on the Mount. He acknowledged that. John Adams, in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, said the 10 Commandments in the Sermon on the Mount contain my religion. Matt Staver has the Liberty Counsel down in Orlando, Florida, First Amendment legal defense organization.
Staver?
Matt Staver, S-T-A-V-E-R.
Okay.
And in Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas, the ACLU was suing to remove these 10 Commandment monuments that had been up for decades. He asked me to go through all my historical research and come up with the evidence to show how the 10 Commandments influenced American law. So I took each commandment individually and showed how it impacted law. And I've sworn first expert witness testimony. He had to have it notarized. He used it in the court cases, and he won 2 of his cases. In Kentucky of January 2003, Federal District Court Judge Carl Forrester said, for good or bad, right or wrong, the 10 Commandments did have an influence on the development of United States law, and it can be constitutional to display them in the appropriate context. So they were able to keep their 10 Commandment monument up. Of course, it begs the question, how come the guy, Judge Roy Moore in Alabama, was ordered to take his down? That was a federal judge. Well, it's easy. There's 2 different types of federal judges. One type tries to make decisions based on what the founders intended. The others could care less about the founders. They're just pushing an agenda.
Well, let me interrupt just for a second to ask you this question. If the 10 Commandments have the influence in American law that is indicated by your book, what changes, if any, should be brought about from where we are today?
Well, you know, our country is based on the concept that there is a God. Colin Hanna was the county commissioner in Chester County, Pennsylvania. The ACLU was suing to remove their 10 Commandment monument. And he said, Bill, I'm giving deposition this week. I'm really good at showing why the last 6, 7 commandments influence law. You know, don't kill, don't steal, don't rape, and so forth. But the first 3, I'm having a trouble why they're important, because they mention God. And I said, Colin, it's real easy. It's the first 3 that provide the motivation to keep the last 7. If there's no God, why keep any of them? You know, in 1811, the 3rd commandment, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. You think, well, why is that important? Well, in 1811, the New York Supreme Court said that if you take God's name in vain, you destroy the efficacy of oaths, the effectiveness of oaths. See, in a court of law, the witness swears to tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Well, if he's taken God in vain so many times, he doesn't respect God. Obviously, that is not a motivation for him to tell the truth, so it destroys that instrument of investigation in the court. You can't trust what the witness says, and so therefore the whole judicial system sort of crumbles. The 4th commandment, you know, keep holy the Sabbath. Well, I traced that one in 1682. The Pennsylvania Constitution says if any business falls on the first day of the week, commonly called the Lord's Day, the business shall be deferred to the next day. Well, that influenced the U.S. Constitution. It says the president has 10 days to sign a bill, Sundays accepted. So the federal Constitution has set a precedent of no business ever done on a Sunday. Why? Because all the way back to the 4th commandment. So anyway, to get to your question, we have gotten away from this, and if we don't have a basis for law that goes back to God, then law is simply the ordinance of man. That's what William Lynn, the first chaplain of the U.S. Congress, said. He says, if there is no God, there is no law. Laws are simply the ordinance of man. And why should one man have to obey the laws of another man? You know, if you make up laws, why should if I make up laws, why should you obey mine? It boils down to whoever ends up with the military and political power is the one that decides who has to, and then you get to despotisms and oligarchies.
Let me jump in here and get us to our first break. We're visiting with William Federer. You're watching The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers back on The Verdict. This week's guest is William Federer. He's the author of several books. One of them we've been focusing this show on is called The 10 Commandments, Their Importance in American Law. Kent?
Well, I understand that you've done some work in what you have called the evolution of tolerance. Can you tell us about that?
I did a radio interview in Madison, Wisconsin earlier this month, and the radio host was saying, well, Christians are intolerant. And I said, no, you got it wrong. He says, in Islamic countries, they are intolerant of Judeo-Christian religion. They forbid it. It says the ACLU is going around in America, and they're intolerant of Judeo-Christian expression. So in a sense, they are setting up a religion of secular humanism in America, and they're making second class anybody that believes in Judeo-Christian heritage. And this, I said to this radio host, I said, do you know where tolerance came from? And he said, well, no. I said, well, it certainly didn't come from Saudi Arabia because it's 100% Islamic there. It's the death penalty if you believe something else. It certainly didn't come from atheistic Russia or communist China, where they are still arresting house church leaders. It says, you look at America's founding. And in Europe at the time, they had this philosophy that whatever the king believed, the kingdom had to believe. If you were in Germany, it was Lutheran. In Switzerland, it was Calvinist. In Italy, Spain, and France, it was Catholic. In Greece, in Russia, it was Eastern Orthodox. In England, it was Anglican. And if you didn't believe the way the king did, you were persecuted and you fled. The first main group that fled were Puritans. They came and founded Massachusetts, 16,000 of them, and there they gave religious freedom to who? Only Puritans. Roger Williams was not tolerated. He fled, founded Providence, Rhode Island, and the First Baptist Church. Thomas Hooker was not tolerated. He fled, founded Hartford, Connecticut, and the Congregationalist Church. And within a generation, you had tolerance for all Protestant denominations. Another generation went by, they tolerated Catholics. Maryland was the first colony to tolerate Catholics. 1731 was the first Catholic church in Philadelphia. And by the time of the Declaration, one of the 56 signers was Catholic, Charles Carroll. He was the richest man in America, and his cousin started Georgetown. 2 Catholics out of the 55 signed the Constitution. Well, then tolerance went out to tolerate liberal Christian denominations like Unitarians and Universalists. They quoted from the Bible, they referred to Jesus, they sort of came under that umbrella. Then tolerance went out to the Jews. Lincoln was the first one to put Hebrew chaplains in the military. Prior to Lincoln, all military chaplains had to belong to Christian denominations. 1860 was the first time a rabbi was invited to open a session of Congress with prayer. 1860 is quite a long time after 1620 when the Pilgrims came over. But then tolerance went out to tolerate monotheists. You know, our coins say, in God we trust. It's God singular. It's not under gods, you know, like Buddhism or Hinduism or Greek mythology. But then tolerance went out to tolerate anybody that believed in any religion. Finally, the tolerance went out to tolerate the atheists, the secular humanists, and the anti-religious. And the last ones in the boat decided it was too crowded and decided to throw the first ones out. You know, I liken it to 2 little round magnets stuck together. At first, it's real hard to pull them apart, and then it gets easier and easier until finally you turn them so much they repel. It's like it was real hard for those Puritans to tolerate other Protestants. It was real hard for the Protestants to tolerate Catholics. But finally, it got easier and easier to tolerate everybody. Finally, tolerance has turned to where now everybody's tolerated except the Judeo-Christian belief system that started the whole thing off.
William, what about the Alabama situation recently where the judge was ordered to remove the 10 Commandments?
Well, you know, I spoke down in Alabama for Judge Moore last May. He has the correct original interpretation of the First Amendment. The First Amendment and the first 10 amendments were the states putting handcuffs on the power of the federal government. The other judge has this new interpretation of you care less what the founders wanted, you're pushing an agenda. You know, 55 men wrote the Constitution, but only 39 signed it. Why didn't the rest sign it? They didn't think it put enough limits on the power of the federal government. Men like Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams were against the Constitution. Why? Because they didn't think it put enough limits on the power of the federal government. So the founders went around to the states and they said, look, if you'll ratify this, then we promise in the first session of Congress, we'll put 10 handcuffs on the power of the federal government. Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof, nor taking away the right to freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of a right to trial by your peers, freedom of right to possess and bear arms. They wanted to limit the power of the federal government so it would not become a big centralized monster like King George III. And so when you look at it, the amendments were the states limiting the power of the federal government. So the reason the federal Constitution says little about religion is not because religion was unimportant. No, it was because religion was so very important they wanted to keep it under the state's jurisdiction. Sort of like local control of the school board, local control of the fire department. It was local control over religion. And you go back and you read the state constitutions in the late 1700s and early 1800s, they have religion all through it. Delaware's constitution, that was in effect up till 1792, said every office holder had to make a declaration of belief in God the Father, Jesus Christ, His only Son, the Holy Ghost, one God, blessed forevermore, and you had to acknowledge the Holy Scriptures as inspired. Pennsylvania's constitution, 1780, said that every office holder made a declaration of belief in God as the creator and governor of the universe, and that the divine inspiration of the Old and New Testament. In other words, they not only had to lay their hand on a Bible to swear into office, they had to swear they believed in the Bible in order to hold office, which makes sense. Why would you lay your hand on a book you didn't believe in? What purpose would that serve? You may as well open it up to a cookbook and lay your hand on lasagna. You know, the idea is you call a higher power to hold you accountable. Well, we've seen a trend getting away from that, and now we see, you know, a country was designed to govern people who could govern themselves if they had an internal restraint that they felt that they were accountable to God. We've been stripping away the internal restraints, stripping away the accountability to God, and so now we have to put more external restraints. We have to pass more external laws, sort of like a scale. If the country is going to be controlled from the inside through morals, you can get by with very few external laws. If you're going to strip away the morals, you're going to have chaos, and people are going to say, government, do something, and the government's going to have to pass more external laws, and every law that's passed takes away a little bit of our freedom. We'll transition away from being a free country.
Bill, are you concerned that if the Ten Commandments gain more acknowledgement or respect or position in American law, that we'd be in violation of the First Amendment?
No, absolutely not.
We've got about half a minute left, Bill.
You know, I came up with 3 secular reasons why it's important for America to stay under God. The first is, do you like the idea of rights that the government cannot take away? If you like rights the government can't take away, you have to acknowledge that the rights come to you from a power higher than the government. That's where John F. Kennedy said, rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. Do you like being equal? Where did that concept come from? Harry S. Truman said, we believe all men are created equal because they're created in the image of God. If there's no God, you're not equal. So it's important for secular people to believe and keep America under God.
Bill Federer, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you, Mick, Kent.
We're going to take a break. We'll come back and
mention
a couple more of Bill's books. We appreciate him coming on The Verdict.
Thanks you very much.
No, Kent will open, and then I'll start talking, then I'll hold this up, and I'll mention, and then after I hold the book up, then we'll go to the website and the phone number. Okay? Welcome back to The Verdict, Kent.
Bill Federer, a very interesting fellow from Missouri, visiting us here in Oklahoma, going around speaking in a number of different places with a very interesting message. And that is, at least on the most recent book he's written, that the Ten Commandments have a place in American law that presumably in some places and under some circumstances is being overlooked or ignored, either accidentally or intentionally, and raises some really interesting questions. Bill's obviously very bright, has done his homework and knows what he's talking about. He suggests that maybe the decision down in Alabama is wrong. I certainly don't know one way or the other. I've not studied it, but it is an interesting tension now that is developing more and more in this country between the First Amendment on establishment of religion and what is the appropriate recognition to be given. I think it is in many ways undeniable that the Ten Commandments and other pronouncements have had a great effect on American law and American lawmakers. Bill is trying to be one of those lawmakers, and it will be interesting to see how that election turns out, and we wish him well.
He made reference to one of his books. This is one we did not show earlier. It's America's God and Country. Let me hold that up there for the camera and get a look at. There's also a CD-ROM version of this book. There you see it. This is full of quotes from American history, especially from the Founding Fathers. And we also have some information on a website and a phone number if you'd like more information on William Federer's work or his life, or you want to get a message to him. This is probably the best way to do it. And there's that number, 1-888-USA-WORD, or you can go online to Amerisearch.net. We appreciate William Federer coming on the show. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict.
You've been watching The Verdict with Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. The Verdict is sponsored in part by the Able Law Firm,